Today it's my job to go over the basics of spey casting and how to create a good spey cast. I'm gonna start from the basics, and I'm gonna go through a bunch of different casts, and I'm gonna show you, proper anchor placement and forming a D-loop, lining your D-loop up, and all the aspects that you need to know to make it all happen. Let's start off with just basic stance and grip. It's very important when you're spey casting to face where you're casting. So right now, for a lot of my demonstration, I'm going to be facing downstream, so I'm going to try and face this way. There's going to be times today when I don't exactly face where I'm casting because I'm going to be talking to you, but get in the habit, if I'm going to cast this way, to stand square. I see a lot of guys standing this way and they're trying to cast this way, or they're standing this way and they're trying to cast that way. It makes it very awkward, so make sure you face your target. In terms of gripping the rod, what I like to do is a good thing to do for beginners is just basically dangle your arms at your side. Where you can grab the rod is usually comfortable. This is a small spey rod. It's called a switch rod. It's 11-foot 9-inch rod. It's got a very short cork. So here I'm on the top of the cork. If I had a longer cork, I like a higher grip. I will grip the rod higher. But a good thing to do, if let's say I had a longer cork, if I grab at the top of the cork and I can't get the rod tip down, I'm gripping too high. You want to bring your hand back until the rod tip comes down. Then you know for sure you're in a good spot to grip the rod. So always make sure you got your hand position right on the rod. If you're too stretched, you'll tend to lock this elbow, and you definitely don't want to lock your elbow. You want to be relaxed and fluid in the elbow. So that's your grip, thumb on top. And what I like to do with the backhand, I see a lot of guys have a tendency to grip the rod too much and too hard. To get out of gripping the rod hard, a good thing to do is just close the back two fingers and use these three fingers to cradle the rod. I actually only really use those, like that. So it's like a ball and joint. And then that allows these fingers for line control down the road as you start to shoot more line. So that is our basic stance and grip. Face our target. You can put your opposite foot forward. I'm casting righty right now, so I'm going to put my left foot forward. I'm going to close these two fingers, grip the rod here and here. That's a good starting position. So when we're starting a spey cast, I'm going to start with a roll cast, because a roll cast is really the basic start to a spey cast. Okay, I'm going to do a quick roll cast, and I'm going to do what's called a switch cast, which is just an inline spey cast. A roll cast, a good roll cast, all you want to do is just drag the rod back level, elevate the rod, and this is a very key thing that we're going to talk about today, and that is the firing position. That is the position from which you're going to make your forward stroke. Understanding this position is really key to making good casts. If you understand that position, it sets you up to go forward. If you don't understand this position and you're not coming into this position prior to going forward, you're going to have a hard time. And this position, what we're doing, we're dragging the rod, we're stopping here, and I'm going to talk about, that's going to be our stop point for all our spey casts if I'm casting this way. If I'm casting this way, that stop point would be here. Okay, and we'll talk about that in more detail. So I'm dragging the rod back to this position, and then I'm elevating both hands and I'm rotating the rod back slightly, making sure that this hand does not get outside my elbow. If I draw a line off my elbow, that rod butt is inside that line. If it's outside that line, you've over-rotated your rod. That is good. That is bad. Okay, so we want to make sure that when we come back, watch what happens. If I come back like this and I elevate, classic over-rotation on your spey cast. That's gonna make for an ugly loop going forward. If you come back here, stop, elevate the rod there. You can see the rod is way outside here. The rod tip should never be behind your head. It's just like a single-handed rod. If I did a single-handed cast, and very often with a single-handed rod, it's breaking the wrist. If I came back and I broke my wrist like that, classic over-rotation. You want to make sure you stop the rod right there. Back to our same point at which we stopped for a roll cast. Right there. That's our firing position. So you're always stopping short of your firing position. That is where I want to stop. That's where I want to fire from. So, roll cast, back, elevate, roll. Okay, and we're just we're accelerating going forward. On a roll cast, it's stagnant going back, and it's accelerating going forward. On a Spey cast, it's accelerating back and forward. And the difference between that roll cast and that Spey cast is I've induced energy into the cast. I've got my D-loop further back, and I've got my anchor further back. So my anchor's here now, okay, and I'll talk about what the anchor is for those of you that don't know. And the D-loop is further back. So the anchor, let's go back to that roll cast, the anchor is this line laying in the water. That's what allows the line to load the rod. It grips the water so that this here, this is called your D-loop, this can load the rod. In a roll cast, we have a lot of anchor and a very small D-loop. So yes, it works, but it's not efficient like a Spey cast. And a roll cast is only good for one direction. It's very hard to change direction with a roll cast. If I wanted to cast towards you guys and I wanted to do a roll cast, again, a roll cast has no energy going back. I come up like this. When I go forward, that line's going to cross itself. Whereas if I did a Spey cast, okay, I can cast that direction if the trees weren't in my way. So, back to the Spey cast. Now, when we do this, there's different types of casts. There's what's called an aerialized anchor cast, and there's what's called a sustained anchor cast. This is an aerialized anchor cast where the anchor, when I sweep back, my anchor and D-loop are formed at the same time. On this cast, when that anchor hits, I have to go forward. I already have a D-loop. I'm forced to go forward. Whereas if I do a sustained anchor cast, I set the anchor first. I can hesitate for a second. Then I form my D-loop and I make my cast. Okay? And it's good to understand both these casts, and it's good to learn all of these casts, sustained anchor cast and aerialized anchor cast. I like using aerialized anchor cast for floating line, lighter sink tips, and smaller flies. If I get into really heavy sink tips and bigger flies, a lot of times the sustained anchor cast is easier because getting that, when you get that line set into your anchor, it gets the tip up out of the water and the big fly out of the water. Whereas with an aerialized anchor cast, if I had a heavy tip on and a big fly, it's very hard to get that fly up out of the water. So it's much easier with a sustained anchor cast. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to start with this switch cast, and I'm going to run through how to develop a good switch cast. The first thing you need on a good switch cast is a good lift. This is something that I see go wrong a lot for people, and most casts go wrong in the first 10% of the cast. And in this cast, it's the lift. So when you do a lift, it is simply that. It is a lift, and I like to lift it almost like a shotgun, both hands at the same time. If I keep my bottom hand low and just lift my top hand, I get a very steep angle in the rod. I don't like that for loading the rod. The rod loads best when it is parallel to the water. If I'm going to load this rod, if it's parallel to the water, I can flex it. See how that rod flexes there? I can flex the rod much better and bend the rod. If that rod's steep like this, it's a lot more awkward to try and bend the rod. Plus, you can see my D-loop all hit the water at the same time, which we'll get into. So, we're doing this lift. We're both hands here. We're lifting straight up. It's that simple. There's no acceleration here. I don't want to lift fast. Big mistake is a fast lift and then sweep, and what that does is it makes my anchor crash. The lift is very gentle. You just want to lift the line out of the water somewhat. If I hesitate here, the line will sag back. Now with a short belly like this, I can get away with pausing here and then making my cast. But if I had a longer belly, it's more important that I lift and continue back. So you don't want any hesitation if you got a long belly, ideally. Lift and sweep. So that's the lift, and you're going to lift above your head maybe a foot or so. It depends how deep you are. If I was deeper in the water, I would lift a little higher. It's actually the same height off the water, but relative to me, it's higher. Okay, the lift is going to be here to make that cast if I was in deeper water. So the lift is here. From here, we're going to sweep back. This rod tip has to come down when I do this sweep to form my D-loop. If the rod tip stays at that height, what ends up happening is my D-loop gets flat. You see how the D-loop all hit the water at the same time? You can't get the back of the D-loop aerialized to drive it out. The rod you see the height of the rod tip right now? This rod tip needs to do this. It needs to come down immediately. So right from there, it's coming down. Right from there, it's coming down and through there. And I just went too slow to get it back, but there, right there, has to come down. If the rod tip stays up, again, I'm gonna get a flat D-loop, it's all gonna hit the water at the same time. The key to this, and this is, I think, the biggest key in casting, is accelerate. You have to accelerate the rod tip. So when I get to the top of my lift and I go to do my sweep, anytime you do a stroke, you have to commit to it. And what I mean by that is, once you start going, you have to keep the rod moving. If I start and I hesitate a little bit, I'm not going to get the line really to do what I want. Now granted, this is a short belly, it kind of did, but you get into a longer belly, that'll never work. It's very important when you start your stroke, you commit to it. Keep it moving. Lift, sweep. There's no hesitation, and you can see the rod tip is gaining speed through the stroke. If I start fast and end slow, the line, you see how I left the line further down? And here's a good demonstration of that. See how fast I went? The line didn't go anywhere? It's simply because I started fast, and by starting fast, what I'm doing is I'm loading the rod early, and as I slow down, what's happening is the fly line is catching up to the rod. So by the time I stop the rod, there's no bend in the rod, and the line just simply stays where it was, or barely moves at all. Now watch the difference, and I'll just do a simple overhead cast. Look how slow I go, yet how the line just absolutely flew back. And it's simple acceleration. You have to accelerate the rod tip. So when I do this sweep, I have to just focus on accelerating. I can go extremely slow, providing I'm accelerating. You can go very slow as long as you're accelerating the rod. So what loads the rod is acceleration. It's moving the rod tip faster than the line. What unloads the rod is stopping the rod. And that's another key thing a lot of people miss is their stop point. They continue the rod too far back, over rotation. You got to make sure when you accelerate that you also stop. And that allows the rod to unload the line back. And that's why as you get better, you can slow your acceleration down. As long as you have a good positive stop, the line will float back for you. You don't want to have to force your cast. Now, so that's your lift, and that is your sweep, is bringing that rod, again, bringing that rod down level. Now, if I did a sustained anchor cast, I don't need to do a lift at this point. All I need to do is keep the rod level and track it back. It's very important in fly casting, in especially spey casting, that your rod remains level going back. If I set my anchor and I track in an upward angle, I'm going to throw my D-loop up in the air, and you see how the anchor came out of the water? That's not good. You don't want to get your anchor out of the water. Very common mistake, or the rod's coming up too high. People are thinking about overhead casting instead of spey casting. A spey cast, the rod should stay level and then lift to go forward. Level and then lift. If I go back again steep, you can see it pulls the anchor. And if I do the opposite of that, if I come back and I drop the rod tip, I'm going to throw my D-loop into the water. So the rod tip always goes low to high. Low to high. Very important. Low to high. Every cast we do. So if I do a double spey, the rod's going to go low to high and out. So that level stroke, what that is doing is it's lining, I have my D-loop, it is lining my D-loop up vertically. If I drop my rod tip as I go back, my D-loop's going to get flat, the bottom of the D-loop's going to all become anchor. If I go up in the air with my stroke, my apex of my D-loop's going to be up so high, it's going to pull the anchor out of the water. You guys, any questions on that? You guys understand that? If I were to change direction, like do a double spey or something? There is a hesitation. While you're hesitating, you're lifting. Is that what you mean? Yeah. When you hesitate, you got to lift. And that's key. If I just come back and I stop right there, you see how a lot more the anchor kind of peeled out of the water? By lifting, it helps to elevate the back of the D-loop. You see how the anchor was very quiet? Very little line in the water. That's ideally what you want. It's continuous. Yeah, it's lift, sweep, lift again, and cast. If I did a double spey, there's no lift. I set the anchor first. It's back, lift again, and out. Or not again, but lift. So back to our switch cast here. I lift, I bring the rod down with an acceleration, I stop here. We talked about this as being our stop point for a roll cast. It's also our stop point for all of our spey casts. This point is what I call 4:30. If I'm casting this way, that's 12 o'clock. Here's 3 o'clock. 4:30 is where the rod's facing. Okay, 3, 12, 1, 2, you guys get that, right? It's like a clock facing this way. That's where you got to stop. You want your D-loop to go to where? 6 o'clock, right? 6 o'clock is opposite of 12 o'clock. So I just look at, if I'm going to cast this way, that becomes 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you guys would be 4:30 right now, okay? So if you watch where I stop my rod on my double spey here, okay, that's 4:30. You could see the D-loop was lined up at 6 o'clock opposite where I was going to cast. Always need the D-loop to be opposite. You see the top half of the D-loop right there? That's what loads the rod. It's this section of line here from the tip of the rod to about the middle section of this belly. That's what loads the rod, this top half of the D-loop. And that has to line up with your target. So when I lift, I sweep, you can see that top half. You see how that top half is directly behind the rod tip opposite of where I was going to cast. That's what you need. So there's 3 things you want to think about casting that'll really help you. Short, level, acceleration. Short, level, acceleration. If you can remember those 3 things for your backstroke, it'll really help you. Short meaning don't bring the rod back probably as far as you think you need to. Level meaning keep the rod level. Acceleration meaning accelerate the rod tip. If you do those 3 things, you should get a good back cast. And then from there, again, like we were just explaining, you need the lift. Short level acceleration to a lift and a forward cast. So I'll just run through a couple casts. It really doesn't matter what cast I do. You'll notice that when I actually do, I'm going to do what's called a spiral roll right now. I'm going to spiral the rod to get the line moving, but when I do my final part of the spiral into my D-loop, you're going to notice my rod's going to track level and short. So it's going to be the same basic stroke. It's going to be level and short. Level and short, lift the rod, and cast. So it's all basically the same in terms of the backstroke, level and short. Does anybody have any questions on anything so far? No? So short level acceleration, lift the rod. So that's the basics to spey casting. What you want to make sure is that your rod tip is never above your head, never high in the air out in front of you. So if I were to do a cast right now, my rod was up here, the cast is already wrong. There's no way to make a spey cast. This rod should never go any higher. When I sweep, that rod should be really no higher than that. Again, if I'm up here, I can't get on top of that to get an anchor and get a D-loop. I can keep the rod really low as long as I lift it. Keep it low, as long as I lift, I'm fine. Low, up, and out. So it's always low to high, low to high, low to high. So if you get it, it's good to start with a roll cast as you practice. I would definitely recommend starting with a roll cast. Get in the habit of tracking the rod like this, stopping it there, lifting to a firing position, and rolling it out. Back, up, and out. Switch cast, level, you can see it's all the same. Low, elevate the rod and cast. So we've kind of gone through some basics. I want to go through some casts now and talk a little bit about sides of the river and what casts you would use. there's a bunch of different Spey casts. They have, the wombat cast and Perry poke and all these casts. But I feel that there are 4 basic casts that you should know. 2 aerialized anchor casts and 2 sustained anchor casts from each, or excuse me, 1 sustained anchor cast and 1 aerialized anchor cast from each side, and 1 cast either off your shoulder or learn to cast with your opposite hand. So from river left, okay, river left for me right now, the river's going, I'm facing you guys, the river's going to my left. So if we were on the other bank fishing, that would be considered river left. This is considered river right, where I'm fishing this way. The current's moving to my right. So for river left, as a right-handed caster, you have, there's 2 casts you can choose. There's a single Spey and there's a snap tee. Okay, and then there's a double Spey off your opposite, there's 3 casts, and then there's a double Spey off your left shoulder. Forget about the other casts for now. Those are, if you can understand those basic casts, you can fish in any wind situation with any fly, any sink tip, anything. So the first one I'm going to go through is called a single Spey. And what a single Spey is, it's the switch cast that I've been doing like this, only with a change of direction. So now, notice you guys, I didn't really get into anchor position. If you notice, my anchor's been hitting here when I'm doing these casts, the tip of the line. Now that I'm going to cast this way, I need my anchor here. Okay, I always need my anchor off my casting side. If I'm going to cast with my right hand, I need my anchor off my right side. So a good way to look at it is that's my target, there's 90 degrees, I want to go 45 degrees, about where my rod tip can touch the water. Maybe a little bit further than that, but in that area. So for a single Spey, what I'm doing is I'm doing that switch cast, I'm doing the lift, I'm changing direction. So I have to sweep around more. Do you see where my anchor landed right here? That was a good anchor placement for a single Spey. We do that again. So lift, come around. Okay, there's my anchor. That's a good anchor to cast this way. I always need to have my anchor outside my line of aim. My rod, when I came forward, if I were to come forward there, my anchor was there, my rod's coming through here. So my rod is going between my anchor and my body. So where am I stopping? 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4:30, right? That's where I'm going to stop in order to cast this way. And it's going to be a short level acceleration. I'm going to lift, I'm going to turn, short level acceleration, anchor. You can see the D-loop was lined up this way. Lift, sweep, touch, and go. It's very important that when you do this, that the rod tip, again, has to come down. It's got to come down. And it's got to come back up to get the anchor into the right position. Now watch, if I don't do my lift back here, watch what happens. You see how my anchor landed in front of me? By lifting the rod, it allows the line to go further back. It allows the anchor to come into the right position. So that lift is very important. Now watch this. We talked about if I keep my rod high, right? You see my anchor goes too far back on my switch cast? Well, the single Spey is the same thing. If I lift like this and I keep the rod at that height, my anchor goes flying out. I don't get an anchor. So it's very important that you lift, you come down with an acceleration. If I don't accelerate, watch this. Okay, if I lift but I come down, but I don't accelerate, I leave the anchor down here. So that leads me to something that I kind of skipped, and that is reading your anchor. Okay, right now if I do a switch cast, my anchor is supposed to be here. So tell me what I did wrong. Somebody tell me what I just did wrong. I didn't bring the rod down, right? So I didn't bring the rod down, my anchor went too far back. So if you look, if you're casting and you're trying to do a switch cast and your anchor's not landing there, it's going too far back, Either you're going with too much power, you're accelerating too hard, or your rod is tracking too high. And this is a really good thing to understand so you can diagnose yourself what you're doing. If I go too soft, if I don't accelerate, my anchor is too far down. So if you're casting and your anchor is consistently below where it's supposed to be, you're not accelerating. You have some sort of a lack of acceleration. Maybe you're starting too quick and ending too soft. You have to make sure that if you just continually flow back, your anchor will come into the right spot. So my point here is understand how to read your anchor. A low anchor is going to signify that you're not accelerating most of the time. Sometimes it's very uncommon because most people don't track the rod too low. Most people have a problem of tracking the rod too high. But a low anchor is either going to be no acceleration or the rod's tracking too low. An anchor that's too far back is going to be too much acceleration or the rod's tracking simply too high. Okay, and I'll demonstrate again. This would be a good acceleration, but just too low. I'm so low that I can't get the anchor back. Here would be a good one again. Anchor's in the right spot. This would be too high. Anchor flies out. This is another one. If you come back and you accelerate upward like this, the anchor hits, but you see how it kind of skipped? So if you see a skipping anchor, like your anchor's kind of touching and then coming out of the water as you stroke forward, that usually means that you're going like this. You always have to finish your acceleration level before you lift. Do not put the lift into the acceleration. In other words, do not do this. That's going to make your anchor fly out. You can see it touched the water, but it skipped out of the water. A good anchor should stay right there as I stroke forward. That's what you want to see right there. A good anchor lays in the water. It stays there while I stroke forward. The anchor should not come out of the water until the line's uncoiling out in front. Anybody have any questions on reading your anchor? Let me show you a little bit more on reading your anchor. Common mistake at 2. What did I do on that one? I lifted too fast, right? By having a fast lift, I sent the line up in the air, and then when I stroked back, I had a good backward stroke level, but because the line was so high in the air, it came down and crashed. Okay, so if you see your anchor crashing, you're probably lifting too hard. You don't want to have a pile of line like that. You want to have the line nice and quiet on the water. So the line an ideal anchor will look like that. It'll lay in very quiet. So that's a good anchor. So read your anchor. So now on the single spey, my anchor is supposed to be here. So if I come back like this, my rod's not coming down. I'm not accelerating. I lifted too fast. You see what I'm saying? Read your anchor. It tells you exactly what you're doing. I tracked too low. My anchor was down here, right? Here's a good one. That was a good one. So a nice smooth lift, come down a little bit, stay level, all the way around to where? 430, right? 12, 3, 430. Lift the rod to allow the D-loop to continue back, make your forward cast. So that's how to execute a good single spey. Again, lift, sweep with an acceleration, lift the rod again, and cast. So that's the same. Any questions on the single spey? Have anyone had problems with the single spey? Have any questions? No? Okay. We're going to move on to the next cast. Again, this is river left. The next cast would be a snap tee. And a snap tee, we're setting the anchor first. I've got my anchor where I want it, the tip of the line. Now I form my D-loop by staying level to 430 and casting. So, how do we do that? A simple way to do this, well, I'm going to pick that tree as my target, draw the letter, and this has nothing to do with your D-loop. Do not confuse this with your D-loop. I'm going to draw a capital D around the tree. I'm going to lift straight up. I'm going to draw the belly of a D and come down. It's backwards for you guys. For me, it looks like a normal D. Okay, so I'm going to go straight up. That's my target. So I'm going to do the D around my target. There's my anchor. And I make sure that I put my acceleration at the bottom of the D going that way. I see too often people accelerate this way and then try and go this way. And that causes your anchor to land in a pile like that. So It's just a smooth lift around, put the acceleration there. Level to 430 and cast. Lift, D, there's my anchor, level, lift, and cast. So, watch this. So my anchor is going to set here. If I do my anchor right, and I come around and I go like this, you see how my anchor came out of the water? I went too much energy and I went up on an upward angle, pulled the anchor out of the water. That's no good. We want to make sure if you focus on tracking the rod level. That is probably one of the biggest things in spey casting, is getting that rod to consistently track level. Has to track level. Level. Regardless of the cast I do. So if I do my snap tee, it's level. 430 lift and cast. Any questions on that so far, on the snap tee? Time? What time is it, Mauro? So that's my snap tee. Is there any questions on that? I know I didn't go into big detail, but it's pretty basic. All these spey casts are pretty basic. If you just follow the basics to it, you shouldn't have a problem. Do you want to hear the line pull out of the water? You're talking about when I do my sweep? Yeah, there should be, you see that little peel there? You should see a little peel there. If you're accelerating properly, you should see somewhat of a peel. You see that little spray there? Simon Gawesworth calls it a mouse. Okay, not a rat. A rat would be, that would be a rat. If I do that, I'm just going to rip my anchor out of the water. So, is that what you mean, Nancy? Is that what you meant, Nancy? So a little peel. Set the anchor, peel it, stop and lift. You can see that D-loop's lined right up. My anchor's in the right spot. It's going to be easy for me to make a forward stroke. Again, a lot of this comes down to going back to the basics of the firing position. Learning this. This hand is about ear level. Again, I showed you guys this rod butt is inside my elbow. Inside. Very important. Not outside. Bad. Good. Well, this is a shooting head. It's actually a Scandinavian shooting head. This line has a belly. It's a running line, thin level line, and then this is a belly or a shooting head. Okay, this is essentially the belly of the line, like a weight forward line. You have to, in this particular line, you have to get the head within a few feet of the rod tip. Ideally, let's say about 2 feet from the rod tip. A foot to 2 feet from the rod tip is ideal. If I have that much line out right there and I try and cast, it's not going to work well. You can see it's kind of awkward. You see that? There's too much running line out to really control it. Ideally, you want to pull that head in there so it's easier to cast. If I'm fishing really short, that's fine. I can bring the head in, and still do my spey cast. I'm just going to do little, mini spey casts. It takes very little energy to do it. And in this case, I'm not going to shoot line because that's all the amount of line that I need. I'm not fishing beyond that. If I'm going to fish longer than the head, then I'm going to shoot line, but I'm always going to retrieve the head back to the rod tip. Does that answer your question? Back to the rod, like just outside, right there is ideal. On this particular line. Some lines, like full-length spey line, I'm going to do a little bit with the long lining. That is a long belly. And it's two-tone. It's green and pink, like a salmon color. So usually you bring that green or pink, the head's green, I bring that into the rod tip a little bit. So it depends on your line. This has a loop system, so when I'm shooting line, I want to keep the loop outside the rod tip. So we've done the single, we did the switch cast, we did the roll cast, switch cast, single spay, double spay. Those are river left casts. There's one other river left cast I want to go over real quick, and that is the reverse double spay. So what a double spay is, I'm going to do the regular double spay first actually. A double spay is when it's a river right cast for a right-handed caster, where I bring the rod over like this, and that sets the anchor below me. Then I form my D-loop and I make my cast. What a reverse double spay is I'm doing it off my opposite shoulder. So I'm bringing the rod over, I'm setting my anchor down here, I'm coming around here. Hold on, I have my rod tip laying in the water there. I bring the rod over, set my anchor, I come around level, bring the rod up, and I cast. So it's all the same basics. Once I have my anchor set, what do? I keep the rod level to 4:30. In this case, it's now going to be 7:30. 12 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 7:30. D-loop is going where? 6 o'clock, opposite of where I'm trying to cast. So if I'm going to work on doing this cast, I'm going to focus on all the basics again. Staying level to 7:30, lifting the rod, and casting out. Fold the rod over, there's my anchor. Now, common mistakes with a double spay is going too soft. If I go too soft like this, see how my anchor's way down there? When I try and form my D-loop, I don't have enough line to really form a good D-loop. If I go too hard, I send my anchor too far upriver. I don't want to do that either. So when I do a double spay, I want to go very, very gentle, a little bit of energy right there. There's my anchor. And it just takes practice to get that down, just to get comfortable with coming over with the right tension to get the anchor consistently in the right spot. Tension, drop it. There's my anchor. And just practice it. And just make sure, don't even start your, if your anchor's not in the right spot, don't even bother. You know what I mean? Like just keep doing this until you consistently get your anchor there. Okay, my anchor's right. Now I can work on my stroke. And all the same basics apply. If I come around and I stroke at an upward angle, my anchor comes out of the water, I know that I stroked too high, or I went up at an upward angle, or there was too much energy, right? If I set my anchor here and I come around too soft and I see that like my line didn't go back into my D-loop, that's the same thing as going with no energy on your switch cast. Again, no energy on the switch cast, low anchor, right? Well, if I do my double spay here and I come around soft with no energy, I leave my line out in front. It's the same thing. Okay, so that's, again, go back to reading your anchor to diagnose what you're doing wrong on your cast. So again, fold the rod over, level, lift, and cast. Oh, sorry. So that's the reverse double spay off your opposite shoulder. And that would be good if anyone is not sure on this. If I had a downstream wind and I wasn't comfortable doing my snap tee because as I came around, the wind's blowing that D-loop into me, then I would want to cast off my opposite shoulder. I want to put you always want to put your anchor and D-loop downwind of you. Okay, so if I was on this side of the river and, you know, I'd normally cast like this, okay, do my double spay off my normal shoulder here, but the wind was blowing really hard upriver, I would have to do a reverse snap tee. I would go like this. I'd get the anchor up here to cast out across the river. So you always put your anchor and your D-loop downwind of you. So I'm going to run through these casts. I'm going to go pretty quickly through it because I think you guys, a lot of this is all going to be the same. And then I'm going to do a little bit with the long rod and just talk a little bit about long lining. So double spay, I'm going to put my anchor here now as a right-handed caster. I'm going to just, again, fold over gentle, a little bit of energy. Right there's my anchor, level, up, and out. That's how you want to execute a good double spay. And if you notice, none of these casts are taking any energy. I'm not fighting the rod. You want to bend, the whole idea is bend the rod, stop the rod. Bend it, stop it. If you bend it and you stop it, the line will go. How do I bend the rod? I accelerate. How do I stop the rod? Simply just make sure it stops. And let me talk about the forward stroke a little bit. So when I come back into my firing position, that's a good position. A common mistake would be this, rolling the rod tip over. So that would be something like this. You can see that really opens my loop up, and you can see the tip of the line's falling straight down. You want to make sure that you come forward like this, then turn the rod over. Like that. That's a good forward stroke. You see that loop was fairly tight, and that's from stopping that rod very close to my acceleration. So a good forward stroke, the rod should stay back, stay back, stay back, stay back. The last thing to go forward is the tip of the rod. So my fingers are the tip of the rod. The last thing to go forward is the tip of the rod. If I go like this, and I stop the rod right there, I'm gonna have a tight loop. If I go like this, and I bring the rod here, I'm gonna have a medium loop. If I go like this, and I stop here, I'm gonna have a big loop. All of those loops though will have good energy because they tracked level going forward. That is the key. It's like your rod tip is tracking a ceiling. It's level. Very important that you track the rod, again, level, and stopping it high. Now, that was a fairly tight loop. I'm going to drop the rod tip a little bit on this one. This is going to open the loop up. So there's a medium-sized loop, right? Here's a big loop. Okay, and I'm just bringing the rod tip down more. All of those are good casts because I track the rod level. Where things go wrong is when your rod tip does this. It goes above the ceiling. That's rolling the rod tip. That's a very common forward stroke mistake. And that comes from a couple things. It can come from bringing this hand forward too fast. So if I bring this hand forward ahead of this hand, it makes the rod tip roll over a circle. You see that? Or it goes from starting with the rod a little too vertical, very common, and I roll the rod tip down. So you always want to start in this position and drift forward. It's like throwing a javelin. You always lead, keep your hand back, 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 then turn it over. It's the only way to throw that. What causes them? A lot of things can cause them. Tailing loops are very often caused from like over rotation. You'll get a tailing loop, hitting the rod tip or something like that. To get rid of tailing loops, and that's what I'd rather teach, is staying outside and coming inside. You see that? Outside, inside. Low and outside, high and inside. You'll never get a tailing loop. Single-handed rod's the same thing. Low, up, and out. You'll never get it. If you do that right, you won't get a tailing loop. It comes very often from breaking your wrist on a single-handed rod. So, there's a tailing loop, something like that, because you're breaking that wrist, and then you're pushing forward with the wrist and going like that, and it makes it come around tail. Stop point on the forward stroke. The right stop point on the forward stroke would be about right there, which would be about 10:30. Okay, if we look at a clock upright, you want to stop at about 10:30. Here's 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 10:30 is where I would say. 10 o'clock, they say 10 to 2, right? Okay. The key is, when I don't like using a clock when I teach casting, okay, if I use a clock, and you say 10 to 2, it makes people think like the hand of a clock, like an arc. You don't want to, if you have your clock here, okay, you should track like this rod, straight across the clock, 10 to 2. Don't follow the hand of a clock, because what's that doing? It's rolling the rod tip. We don't want to roll the rod tip. We want to learn to track the rod tip. When I was a kid, my friend had an apple tree in his yard, and we used to take sticks that we'd carve, and we'd shove the apples down the sticks, and we'd launch them, right, at the neighbor's house. And if you think about doing that, you keep your hands back, 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 and then you throw the apple, right? So I keep my hands back, 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 and then I send the apple. The last thing to come forward is the apple, right? I want to think about going slow and then accelerate and stop. And that's what makes that apple fling level, right? If I roll the rod tip, if I come back and I roll the rod tip, I'm going to get the apple. The apple's going to the apple's going to go up into the air and it's going to land 30 feet in front of me, right? So you want to think about throwing the apple. I want to throw the apple far, right? That's how you want to do that. So we did the double spey. The other cast from this side would be your spiral roll. And that is, there's a couple ways of looking at it. Probably the easiest way is just draw an egg laying on its side with your rod tip. And you want to do it like there's a wall here. Your rod stays on the wall. So I go back, I draw an egg, I accelerate there. You always put the acceleration at the end of your backstroke. The most common mistake I see with this cast is people are so anxious to make their forward cast that they put their acceleration there and then they try and go back. You can't do that. You have to, the first part of this cast is to form a D-loop. You have to think about accelerating into this way, not that way. So you want to go around and go that way. Around that way. And I'm accelerating, I'm lifting, and I'm casting. All the same basics. So that's your spiral roll. The only other one from this side of the river, again being river right, would be if the wind was blowing upriver, I would do a reverse snap tee. And now I'm putting my anchor up here. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing a backwards letter D. So if I cast at that tree, I start here, I do a backwards letter D around that tree. Come around level, lift the rod, cast at the tree. Any questions on any of that I went through? A curve in the cast? Your rod tip is usually not lined up with your target. Like, you're out of your firing position is probably not right. Probably over-rotated. Or what can happen is, and it's not too common, but if I'm out that way too much, it may cause my loop to look sideways in the air like that. Did you see that? Because my D loop is out of line. My D loop is out of line too much. I'm casting this way. My D loop's facing that way when I'm trying to cast that way. The D loop should be that way. Usually it's, you know, people over rotate, and then the D loop, the forward stroke looks something like that. Did you see that? Just a cause of over rotation. Or they're too far that way. You see, it makes the loop kind of come this way. It's very uncommon that someone's out of line this way though, because it's natural to go this way. As a right-handed caster, the line can only go clockwise. As I cast back, the line is going this way. So if I want my D loop lined up here, and this is not something I talked about yet, but as I do that level acceleration, it's good to push out a little bit at the end of your stroke. Once the rod passes perpendicular to your target, so if my target's here, once my rod passes perpendicular, I push out. If I push out prior to perpendicular, like if I go like this, then I'm probably, see how the D loop's facing that way? You want to stay really tight to your body and then out and up. You see that? Stay really tight as you bring the rod, then push out. That gets the D loop to line up with where I'm casting. So I lift, push out, and you can see there the D loop's lined right up. So I'm going to just grab that other rod real quick, do a little bit of long lining, and then we'll call it a go. What time is it? What's that? Okay. Okay. That's it.